For the last 12 years, the Open and Affirming Coalition has been in the hands of an amazing executive director, the Reverend Andy Lang. At the end of this year, the torch will be passed to another director who will have some pretty big shoes to fill. I've only been working with Andy for about the last 2.5 years, and in that time, I have found him to be very kind, very passionate, and very astute in his leadership of the organization. At times, I can be a little bit much, but Andy's amazingly cool, calm demeanor and voice can soothe and reel me in. And so, over these next few minutes, we're going to hear from some people who know him far better than I do, but who can speak on his intention and his leadership and the work that he's done. Now, I did have the privilege of bestowing the stole upon him at his recent ordination in Cleveland, and I can honestly say that that was one of the highlights of my ministry. Thank you so much, Andy, for the work that you have done, and I look forward to continuing to work with you in this next chapter of your life and your ministry. Be blessed. Now, we'll hear from some of your friends.
Hello, everybody. This is John Dorhauer. I'm General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ, and I bring you greetings as you all gather for your national meeting of the Open and Affirming Coalition. And in doing so, we say goodbye to a gifted leader and a dear friend of mine, the Reverend Andy Lang. I was privileged to attend his ordination a short while ago. It was an incredibly moving experience, an incredibly joyful experience. And it was fitting that we laid hands upon him and ordained him into Christian ministry. And he's been an outstanding leader for quite some time, as you all know. And I just wanted to offer a few words in reflection and in gratitude for the work that he's done and the friend that he is, and the leader that he's become. I experience Andy as a humble leader, which is not often a quality you find in one as gifted and as intelligent as Andy, but he is incredibly humble. Smart as a whip. He hides behind that humility, this incredibly deep intellect. I remember hearing the committee on ministry that approved him for ordination say that his ordination paper was one of the most extraordinary theological documents that they had read in quite some time. Andy is a deep listener. He orients himself in the presence of another in ways that their story can come out, and he can receive their story and accept them for who they are, and use the deep listening not only to engender compassion within his heart, but to direct the action that he will take in shaping the future of the Open and Affirming Coalition. Andy is quiet and reserved, but he is firm in his convictions, strong in his work for justice on behalf of the LGBTQ community, and unflagging in his zeal and courage and efforts to make meaningful changes that matter in the world. Andy, I've noticed this about him. Andy feels deeply that the pain and the anxiety and the fear and the danger experienced by LGBTQ folks all over the country and around the world. He in many ways embodies and incarnates and takes into himself all of that, but then channels it in some extremely powerful and very smart ways to make meaningful changes on their behalf. there are three things, three events, three occasions that I experienced personally with Andy that I want to mention, both because each one of them made me a big fan of his. And each one of them tells something about the quality and character and integrity that Andy functions with. I can remember having conversations with Andy as the denomination began to invest in its own anti-racist work, about Andy challenging the coalition and the members of the coalition, not just to make open and affirming about the liberation of the LGBTQ community, but also expanding commitments to open and affirming to include anti-racist work. That was a risky move on his part. It was a bold and courageous move on his part. But he understood that to be open and to be affirming wasn't just a statement that one made relative to one's sexual identity, that it expanded beyond that. And I appreciate that so much in Andy. There was a moment when, there have been several moments when I've had to be in deep dialogue with members of the more conservative theological party of the United Church of Christ. And there are several of these, but one that is functioning and active now and that I relate to is the Faithful and Welcoming group. And I would meet periodically with leaders from the Faithful and Welcoming community. And they were coming one year to Cleveland to meet with me. And Andy approached me and wanted to know if he could be a part of that conversation, to open up dialogue, to build relationship and trust. And of course, they were open to that. And Andy then sat with me over a couple of days in meetings with leaders from the Faithful and Welcoming. And I witnessed two things about Andy of note. Again, the deep listening that he did with people whose theology was not only different than him, but could be perceived as a threat to the folk that Andy represents in the coalition. But Andy did the deep listening and tried to understand and relate to. But the second thing was the firmness with which he held to his convictions and spoke to them about the need for the coalition to expand and to grow in spite of the opposition, the theological opposition that he faced in the presence of those leaders. And it took some courage and some fortitude and some integrity to do that. And then the third thing that I want to talk about, in 2013, I was conference minister of the United Church of Christ in the Southwest. And we asked Andy to come and be our keynoter for the week. He was extraordinary. I've talked about his intellect. The presentations that he gave were extraordinary and powerful. And motivating and inspiring. And I'll never forget that weekend. There were commitments made, and there was an openness to what Andy was inviting us and asking us to do on behalf of the coalition. And then I watched over the next year as the work that Andy inspired galvanized. And it was almost a full year later, in October of 2014, that 125 clergy, mostly UCC, not entirely, there were some UUA and some Jewish colleagues present, stood around the state in front of courthouses, awaiting a decision from the Attorney General of the state of Arizona that would make Arizona a marriage equality state. I'm not saying that it happened only because of the organizing work of those clergy whom Andy inspired. And I'm not saying it only happened because of what Andy said and did, but I am saying that it wouldn't have happened as quickly as it did without the support offered by the clergy of the Southwest Conference. And that wouldn't have happened without the extraordinary work that Andy did to inspire them. And so it was on October 17, 2014, when Arizona became a marriage equality state, 100 plus clergy stood outside of those courthouses with signs saying, "We stand ready to marry you," and performed over 200 weddings that day. So, Andy, as you walk away, you leave behind a legacy that you can be proud of. You certainly leave behind a legacy that the United Church of Christ is proud of. And you're going to hand over an organization to your successor, whomever they may be, that is ready and willing and able to serve. Somebody once said, a good leader, their primary responsibility is to leave the place that they've been in better place than it was when they got there. And you've done that. And you're turning over a successful organization. I am so grateful to you, Annie, for everything that you've done. I've watched you lead with grace, with integrity, with intellect, with power, with passion, with courage. And I'm grateful to you. I wish you all the best in whatever unfolds in the horizons that await. But for everything that you have been and everything that you are and everything that you will be and all that you have done, I give God thanks. Many blessings. And to all of you in the coalition, I pray for you as you are in the search for Andy's successor. Continue to do the good work that you do on behalf of the community that you serve. It is much needed. Thank you.
I know this is a celebration of Andy's retirement from serving as the executive director of the coalition, but it would be a huge oversight not to acknowledge Andy's contributions and imprint on the United Church of Christ that extend far beyond the coalition. I began serving in the national offices in 1991, and Andy came in 1993. So we've known each other for almost 30 years. I wish I could say that I hired him, but he started his UCC life with the Office of Communications. If you have read his bio, you know that he developed the UCC website. That's easy to overlook as we take the websites for granted now. But this was 1994, before anyone really knew how important websites were going to become to the world and to the life of the church. So Andy developed UCC.org before Google was even invented. Who knew? I observed his work and ministry from afar. Through his work with the web team, when we were together in staff meetings, when I would walk the halls of the 8th floor and stick my head in his office and for a quick conversation. I knew him as one of the dependable, capable, and loyal staff members of the Office of General Ministries. But I really got to know Andy when I left the national offices. I moved to Kansas, and I was committed to a church that was welcoming and inclusive of all. And I took that commitment with me when I became the conference minister of the Kansas-Oklahoma Conference. That meant finding ways to have conversations about sexual orientation and the importance of the churches becoming open and affirming. While I knew those conversations were important, I also knew that I needed someone else to help lead those conversations with me in Kansas-Oklahoma Conference. And I had one rule about UCC partners, and that is, unless politics demanded it, I never brought anyone into the Kansas-Oklahoma Conference unless I was 100% confident in their ability to deliver. Not only deliver, but to knock it out of the park. In my years in Kansas, Oklahoma, Andy was with us on 4 different occasions. And after every event, my confidence in his skills, as well as my appreciation and my affection for him, only grew. He has the ability to meet people where they are. He listens with such an intensity that you know he is fully present. I watched him as he fielded questions, some that I would clearly be doing an eye roll on. But he listened with grace. He gave a gracious non-judgmental yet heartfelt response without letting the person off the hook. I first heard the term graceful engagement from Andy, and you know it fits him. Andy, you may remember the panel that you participated in back in 2016 or 2017. I heard from several pastors of small rural churches that they were supportive of being open and affirming in their congregations, but felt that they couldn't bring up the conversation themselves because they knew that their small congregations were so divided. So I decided that the conference could sponsor such an event. We promised that there would be no judgment and that all questions were welcome. But I needed to assure that that tone was respected. So I needed to find the right moderator. And so I called Andy, and he didn't disappoint. And 2 or 3 of those congregations that participated that day later became open and affirming congregations. That was the beginning of KO's journey on becoming an open and affirming conference. Some of you may know that I have an adult child, Brian, who identifies as non-binary. And somewhere along the way, I listened to you, Andy, as you told your story about your journey with your mother. I was deeply touched and grateful because I knew that my relationship with Brian had been so different because of my experience in the UCC and with you. It had made me much more accepting than I would have ever been without you. Thank you for that incredible gift. I have learned so much from you, Andy, and I know that I am one of literally thousands whose life has been touched by your ministry. Graceful engagement, steady, dependable, the person I have always turned to with 100% confidence that you would deliver in whatever situation or audience you were addressing. I join others in wishing you the very best as you learn to retire and rest. You more than deserve it. So from Kansas, because I knew you, because I know you, I have been changed for good. Thank you.
So, Reverend Lang, here we are. It's 2022. I remember the first time I saw you. 15 years ago at the General Synod in Hartford, you held the door open for me as I entered the Coliseum. I thought I recognized you, but I wasn't sure who you were, other than maybe an important UCC person. Soon enough, I found out that you had a long history of serving the denomination. I became the national O&A consultant for the coalition, and soon you arrived to do nothing less than rescue and revitalize the coalition. We worked side by side on our shared mission until 2015. Thank you for sharing my second career. There's no way people can understand how many details there were to your ministry. I'm so grateful to you for the full dedication you gave to the Open and Affirming program and the coalition. You've served our community with love. You've brought the truth and our message to the larger UCC in a way that will keep O&A ingrained in the denomination. The way you live your faith is the way you have directed the coalition, with a calmness, a steady moral compass, and a never-wavering hope. I'm so pleased that you reached your goal of ordination. You were always a minister. In fact, you were our own monk. Blessings to you always, my friend, until we meet again for lobster and ice cream on Cape Cod.
Andy, I am grateful for the past 10 plus years that we've known each other. I remember our first in-person meeting. There were several of us around the table that were new to the leadership team. I was excited to be sitting with so many wonderful people, and, well, I was a little bit nervous. I don't remember exactly what you said, but I do remember it was a really dry pun. The air kind of stilled for a second until we all realized you were making a joke. It didn't take long until others were joining in. It was a really great icebreaker, and, well, I've always wondered if you did that on purpose, gave us like a really dry pun for the purpose of making us wonder what exactly was going on until we started to laugh. If it was on purpose, well done. Since then, your dry sense of humor has caught me off guard many times. You come up with things out of nowhere with joy in your smile and a slightly devilish twinkle in your eye. I appreciate that quality of yours. Your joy of life and willingness to laugh brings out the positive side to this work. Another quality I appreciate is your grace. You know that if you want to receive grace, you have to offer it. Your willingness to converse with graceful engagement is a skill that you've cultivated, and it's very much a gift of God's Spirit working through you. In this kind of work, we sometimes get pushback. There was once I wanted to respond by speaking my mind in no uncertain terms. Your suggestion was that we hold that action until it was really necessary. The understated way that you made that suggestion, as well as your appreciation for the purpose of my anger, both affirmed me and helped me to take the edge off of the moment. A few years ago, you preached at my installation service for Plymouth United Church. You stayed the weekend giving a talk on Saturday, going out to eat with several people and other such activities. We all found meaning in your words. Your preaching was inspiring. But what I heard most about afterward was your presence. People knew that when they were in your presence, whether you were speaking to a group, behind a microphone, or talking to someone one-on-one, they knew that they were being cared for. You left this lingering energy of love and kindness behind. And for that, I am deeply grateful. I know that you're retiring from this particular position. I also know that your calling to this work isn't over. You have goals yet to reach, dreams to fulfill, plans to make, and good news to spread. I'm looking forward to seeing how you use your humor, grace, friendship, and wisdom as you move into this next call that the Spirit is whispering into your soul.
I first met Andy in August of 2011. Andy had only been in his position at that time less than a year. I was applying for the job of bookkeeper. My title now is financial director. This is something I always have to ask him. He always remembers. I don't. He looked a little deer in the headlights in that interview. He told me that earlier that day, the administrative assistant had let him know that they did not intend to come back to work, ever. So began Andy and my journey to learn our jobs and create our working relationship together. I was recently discussing what that working relationship might look like with the new executive director. The phrase that came to me about our time together was that Andy was kind and respectful. Not all the bosses I have had have been kind and respectful, and these are important gifts that I do not take for granted. It's hard not to like Andy's sense of humor, even if it's so dry, sometimes it's brittle, and we share a love of history and appreciate the importance of preserving it. I certainly cherish the history of our time, working and being friends.
Dear Andy, I remember our times together in the New York conference on the road, conducting open and affirming summits, and through those summits, evangelizing, I think, in a good way, and spreading the message of the gospel, bringing all people into the love of God and the body of Christ. No matter where those churches were, whether they were in New York City or Buffalo or anywhere in between, and no matter where they were on life's journey around being congregations of extravagant welcome, you welcomed them, invited them, and challenged them in a gentle and gracious way to draw their circles wider. And when there were issues to address around their discernment, I could always count on you for sage and sound advice to share with them. I know at least 15 congregations during that time that became open and affirming congregations thanks to your ministry. And I'm sure that anyone in conference ministry would have a similar story and testimony to tell. But what I have always marveled about you is your steadfast love and commitment to the United Church of Christ that prophetically compels you to exhort the United Church of Christ to be the very best church that it can be. I have always loved that beneath that calm, steely, stoic New England exterior was a fiery prophet in the mold of Amos, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. When you were finally ordained last year, it was clear to me that all that we were doing was putting an exclamation point on what God had ordained for you to do years before. And it was certainly the prophet within you that propelled the Open and Affirming movement not to be a designation, but yes, a movement, calling the United Church of Christ not merely to tolerate or welcome with restrictions, but to really open up to and affirm the gifts of people from the LGBTQ plus communities in ministry. Not only the United Church of Christ, but I strongly believe the Church Universal owes you a debt of gratitude, for you have opened the doors for so many people in the LGBTQ plus communities, including yours truly, to embrace the love of God again after years of being wounded and hurt by God's people. I don't consider it a stretch at all to say that if it were not for you, I would not be here today. So please accept my personal and eternal gratitude for not only being my friend and my brother and my colleague, but also for being my trailblazer. It is with so many mixed emotions that I share these thoughts with you. I know you know it's time, but it still feels too soon a little bit to me. And I can't quite imagine the United Church of Christ without you. But if anyone on this earth has fought a good fight, you have. And nobody deserves more to move on to the next chapter in their lives than you do. So Andy, thank you so much for the profound ways that you have blessed and will bless so many people for years to come. God bless you. Godspeed, my friend. Love you.
My name is Oby Ballinger. I serve as pastor at Edina Morningside Community Church, United Church of Christ, just outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. I remember meeting Andy probably 15 years ago or more when the coalition sponsored my participation in the National UCC's Council for Youth and Young Adult Ministries. And in that role, I every once in a while would go to the church national headquarters in Cleveland and have a chance to cross paths with Andy in his several roles on the national staff. I remember sharing early feedback with you, Andy, when you were part of the rollout of the MyUCC online platform, and we bonded over the daily devotional emails. But one encounter that gave me an indelible impression of you was running into you in the elevator bay at 700 Prospect. And we had an unexpectedly long and detailed and heartfelt conversation, bonding over morning and evening prayer. And I was struck by the depth of spirit and your connectedness to God in the midst of the work of justice and the work of the church. That's been my impression of you ever since, as I've watched your leadership of the coalition, staying connected to God and the deeper, ineffable power that guides us, even as we do the work of justice and partner with all sorts of other ways and communities that God leads and works for justice in the world. I've been grateful to see your example for us of such faithful witness. And the coalition has been led through your example. We've been infused by your spirit, your grace and groundedness. Thank you for your faithful service, your not seeking the spotlight, and nevertheless just attending to what needed the attention, doing what needed to be done for for the sake of God's work in our lives. Blessings on all that is yet to come, all the places that God will yet lead you and grant you life. Thank you for what you've given to the coalition. We are deeper connected to God, to one another, and to the Spirit by your presence and your leadership. God bless you, and we'll continue to see you in all the places God calls us next as a coalition, as a movement, and as the church. Blessings, Andy, and thank you.
Hello, Coalition family. I'm the Reverend Mike Schenemeyer, and I serve as minister and team leader for the Help and Wholeness Advocacy Team in Justice and Local Church Ministries of the United Church of Christ National Ministries. And I'm the executive director of the United Church of Christ HIV and AIDS Network. Andy, I'm deeply grateful for the strong friendship and collegiality that you and I have shared over the past 2 decades. Even before I joined the national staff, I was acquainted with your work on developing the first UCC website and through interactions on UCC ChristNet, which was part of EcuNet, one of the first internet networking platforms. We got to know each other better when I joined the national staff, and you have always been a wonderful colleague. You always give great perspectives. You're a great collaborator, and you're especially good at understanding and working with some of the more conservative parts of the UCC family. When the coalition went through a difficult leadership transition and its viability was threatened, you stepped in. You gave steady pastoral leadership and strengthened the Open and Affirming program. We've spent countless hours working together and supporting each other. Thank you, Andy, for all you've done, and especially for being such a good colleague and friend. I pray all God's blessings on your journey forward.
Wow, such an amazing ministry, and I'm so proud of the work that Andy has done, and I look forward to see what he does in this next leg of his journey.